We are medicating people for lifestyles that are making them miserable. Not all of them, not every case, but far more than we want to admit. We sleep like trash, we barely move, we live under artificial light, numb ourselves with alcohol, stare at screens all day, barely go outside, barely connect, and then we act shocked when our mood collapses. So before you take a pill for a life your biology is actively rejecting, try fixing your life first. And let me get ahead of the outrage right now. This is not me saying depression is fake, and this is not me saying medication never helps. It does, but for the right people at the right time. But for mild or less severe depression, major guidelines do not say antidepressants should be the automatic first step. NICE specifically says not to routinely offer antidepressants first line for less severe depression, and the WHO says psychological treatments come first, and that antidepressants are not needed for mild depression. And look, I am not saying this from someone who hasn't been through it. I had severe anxiety and panic attacks. I got to the point where I couldn't sleep because I would literally jump awake and panic right at the edge of falling asleep, over and over again until I was completely exhausted. I went to the doctor. She told me I needed SSRIs. I absolutely questioned it, but I was told there was basically no side effects, no real withdrawal issues, and that it was the right move. So I agreed. About 2 days in, I started having uncontrollable muscle spasms, so I reached back out and was told that was normal. I did not accept this as being normal for my body, though, so I immediately quit taking them. And yes, to be fair, antidepressants can help some people, but side effects and withdrawal symptoms are real enough that the WHO says clinicians should keep adverse effects in mind, and NHS guidance lists withdrawal symptoms including sleep problems, anxiety, muscle and joint aches, palpitations, dizziness, and more. So this is the point where I started asking a different question. And that question was not what medication do I need, but what is my lifestyle doing to the system I'm trying to medicate? And that is what this video is all about. Because from an evolutionary standpoint, the human brain evolved for something very different than what we do today. It evolved for sunlight, movement, tribe, rhythm, purpose, and recovery. It was built for a world of real connection and real effort, not one of artificial light, broken sleep, constant stimulation, and digital isolation. And there are absolutely real papers that are written about this. In Depression as a Disease of Modernity, the argument is basically that modern life has pushed people towards less movement, less sun, less sleep, and more isolation. And in circadian rhythm disruption and mental health, researchers lay out how broken sleep wake cycles, artificial light at night, and disrupted daily rhythms can make mood worse. So, no, I'm not saying depression is just bad habits. I'm saying modern life may be pushing the brain into conditions that it does not handle well. So, what do I actually believe then? Well, I believe a lot of people with mild depression and a lot of people stuck in anxiety spirals that look a whole lot like modern life overload are trying to medicate signals their body is sending for a reason. And the first big signal is movement, because the evidence here is way stronger than most people realize. A 2024 BMJ systematic review and network meta analysis found that exercise is an effective treatment for depression, with walking or jogging, yoga, and strength training among the more effective options. Another meta analysis found that in adults with non severe depression, exercise performed about as well as antidepressants for reducing depressive symptoms. And for anxiety, WHO guidance says structured physical exercise should be considered for adults with generalized anxiety disorder or panic disorder. This is not just a wellness talk, there is legitimate evidence behind this. And from an evolutionary standpoint, it completely makes sense. A brain and body that is built for regular physical output does not do well sitting under LEDs for 10 hours, barely moving, then trying to think its way out of misery at midnight. And this is where I think people sabotage themselves. They hear exercise helps depression and translate that into cool, I need to become a marathon runner. No, that's not the point. The point is to start giving your body signals that it can actually recognize. And that can be way simpler than most people think. It can be as simple as just going for a walk. In fact, a 2024 meta analysis found that different forms of walking can help reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety. It doesn't even have to be outside to count, although getting outside and getting some sunlight can absolutely help this too. So let me ask you, when was the last time you actually just went for a walk? Not to the car, not walking through Walmart, and not from your desk to the kitchen. An actual walk, just to move your body and clear your head. Actually, go ahead and let me know in the comments when that last time was. And if that walk turns into more, that's great. Jogging, hiking, lifting, yoga, all of these things count too. And for me personally, when anxiety hit, I started running a mile every time I felt it coming on. Not because I was training for anything, not because I was trying to become some endurance athlete, but because I figured out pretty quickly that my body felt better being used than sitting there drowning in panic. Now, to be clear, it does not have to be that extreme. I tend to go a little overboard sometimes. That was just the way that I dealt with it. And sometimes that turned into several miles a day. And over the course of about 2 months, I lost nearly all of my anxiety. I was sleeping better and felt more in control of my body. But that is my experience. The bigger point is not that you need to go run miles every time you feel anxious. The point is that movement belongs in the treatment conversation, not off to the side. Now let's talk about sleep, because if your sleep is trash, it becomes a whole lot harder to feel okay. And I think a lot of people underestimate just how much sleep affects their mood. Your stress hits harder, your anxiety hits harder, you are more reactive, more exhausted, more mentally foggy, and way more likely to spiral over stuff you normally could handle. And the problem is, modern life is almost perfectly built to wreck your sleep. We stay inside all day under dim light. Then at night, we keep piling on the exact things that make it harder for the brain to wind down: bright lights, screens, late caffeine usage, drinking alcohol that's pretending to help. And then people wonder why they feel wired, exhausted, anxious, flat, and mentally off. Because your brain does not recover well when your rhythm is a mess. It just doesn't. And this is where a lot of people miss the point. They reduce sleep down to hours. But it's not just about hours, it's also about rhythm, light, timing, consistency, and it's about what you're doing before bed and what you're doing first thing in the morning. Because if you spend all day inside under weak light, then stay up under bright light at night staring into a screen, you're basically teaching your brain the exact opposite of what it needs to wind down. And then we make it worse. We think that we're winding down, but we're usually just feeding the same stimulation that's keeping us awake. We scroll in bed, we overthink in bed, we stress in bed, we drink at night because we think it helps, when really it often just makes sleep worse. So if your sleep is a mess and your mood is falling apart, that is probably not a coincidence. It may be one of the biggest reasons everything else feels harder. And honestly, I have a whole video on sleep and how to actually start fixing it, because this topic goes way deeper than I can cover here. So if your sleep is clearly one of the biggest issues, go check that out after this. What I would start with though is getting your rhythm under control. Wake up at a more consistent time. Get outside early and get some daylight into your eyes. Make your nights darker and stop teaching your brain that the bed is a place for panic. Because a lot of people do not need a stronger sedative, they need a stronger rhythm. Now, on to the third pillar, your diet. This one is less flashy, but it still matters. Because your brain is not floating around in space, it's attached to your body. And if your body is running on processed food, your blood sugar's all over the place, and you're not actually getting that much nutrition, your brain is probably not starting from a great place. Here's the honest version of the evidence. The diet evidence is not quite as strong as the exercise evidence, but it's still real. A 2019 meta analysis found that dietary changes led to a small but significant improvement in depressive symptoms, even if anxiety did not seem to respond the same way. And then you have clinical trials like SMALS and HealthMed, which both showed that when people cleaned up the way they ate, especially with a more Mediterranean style approach, depression and mental health scores improved. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that kale cures depression, but I am saying this. If you're sleeping badly, moving too little, never seeing daylight, and eating like a raccoon at a gas station, don't act shocked when your mood is unstable. That is not moral judgment, that is just biology. And then we have the thing that modern life strips away the fastest: real people. Human connection matters more than people want to admit, because a lot of modern life is deeply anti human. We are more connected than ever and somehow more alone than ever. And I'm not saying one coffee with a friend suddenly fixes depression. The evidence is more serious than that. A 2022 review found that social connectedness appears to protect against depression and anxiety. And another long term study found that people who were more socially connected had a lower risk of developing depression and anxiety later on, while loneliness predicted worse outcomes over time. Now, that loop matters because depression isolates you, and isolation feeds depression. So, the very thing your brain may need most becomes the thing depression convinces you to avoid. Now, to be fair, the evidence for social connection interventions as treatment is not as clean as the exercise evidence. A newer meta analysis says these interventions show some promise, but still need more high quality research. So, don't oversell this as some magical one stop cure. But the practical takeaway is still strong: call somebody, see someone, join something, and stop trying to deal with everything alone. Your brain can survive the isolation, it just does not do well there. And then we get to the uncomfortable truth. A lot of people are making this worse without realizing it. Not because they're weak, not because they're lazy, and not because they're broken, but because they're living in ways that keep pushing the brain in the wrong direction. That is not blame, that is just biology. And this is not just my opinion. Even the basic guidance hits the same themes. Move regularly, stay connected, keep your sleep and eating habits more consistent, and do not lean on alcohol. So, no, the answer is not to just think positive. The answer is to stop living in ways that keep making this harder. Now, this is where the internet usually turns stupid. One side says SSRIs are poison and nobody needs them. The other side says if you're struggling, just get medicated and stop overthinking it. Both of these are lazy because the real middle ground is way more useful. For mild or less severe depression, the guidelines say don't jump straight into antidepressants first. Start with lower risk, evidence backed moves. But antidepressants are not made up either. A large 2018 meta analysis in The Lancet found they outperform placebo overall in adults with major depressive disorder. So, this video is not anti medication, it's anti the easy way out. So, let's bring this back to the point. This is not me saying nobody needs medication, and it is not me saying depression is fake, and it is definitely not me saying a walk magically fixes everything. I'm saying for a lot of people with mild or less severe depression, the first move should not automatically be a pill. The first move should be looking at whether your life is working against your biology. Because if you're barely moving, barely sleeping, barely seeing daylight, barely connecting, eating poorly, and living under constant stress, then of course your brain is going to feel it. That does not mean medication never has its place, but it does mean a lot of people may be reaching for the easiest option before they have really dealt with the obvious stuff their body is starving for. That is the point. Not never take meds, not just go for a walk, not your depression isn't real. Just this. For a lot of people with milder depression, the answer may not be that your brain is broken. It may be that your life is out of alignment with what the human brain was built for. If you want to live longer and feel better doing it, follow for more.